Yes, we are able to see.
1 minute. Allow. Oh, you're able to see now? Awesome.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, by default it is working then. Okay, this is Microsoft Teams. Now I need to. Where did I open it? The problem is I have too many tabs open. So somewhere here probably. This is that other project. Okay. Oh, yeah, fine. Yeah, simple one. Cool. So first things first, right? So basically, I'll give you the context as to why this whole workflow manager thing came into picture. All right. So Anuvaad so basically when Anuvaad was built initially, it was more like a monolith application. Not exactly a monolith, although although the internal implementation was sort of microservices, but still, when you look at that application as a whole, it was still a monolith application where the components were very tightly coupled to each other. Because of which we had a lot of problems with the application. The standard problems that you have with any monolith application, right? You won't be able to scale it, or you won't be able to make it configurable. You won't be able to mix and match different components of the code to what you call, like, build different features and all that. So because of that, it was extremely important for us to break Anuvaad from a monolith application into a microservices based application, so that we have multiple components which could be used as components as part of the system and also as standalone applications. So that, say for example, I have a NER tool. Right now it's not there, but let's say there is a NER tool. Now that NER could be used as a standalone application also, and also as a part of the Anuvaad pipeline, both. So this way, the whole Anuvaad, the components of the Anuvaad pipeline became much more powerful, where you could kind of do translation when it is involved in the Anuvaad pipeline. When it is not there, you can use it as a standalone machine to perform that particular task as well, right? So, making it microservice. This was the whole idea why we wanted to make it a microservices based application. So, in the process, while we broke it from a monolith application to the microservices based application, we divided it into multiple components. Those are the components that you see today: the file uploader, file converter, or block merger, OCR, translator, NMP, tokenizer, document converter. All of these are different components. Initially, they were all built in as a single application, where they were very tightly coupled to each other. Now, right now, they're totally, like, not totally independent, but yeah, they're very loosely coupled, so that they could be used as a part of the pipeline and also as separate independent applications. Okay. Now the challenge is, once you break a system from a monolith architecture to a microservices based architecture, now you need an orchestrator between these components, right? Because how will block, say for example, you want to do translation. Translation is your task. If you want to perform translation, you know that first you have to do a file uploader, then you should do block merger, then you should do tokenizer, then you should do translator. This is step one, step two, step three, step four. But for you to do that, how will the modules know? How will block merger know that, once I'm done doing my job, I should give my output to the tokenizer? How will tokenizer know that once I'm done doing everything, I should give it to translator? Correct? So in order to add this feature or this capability, we came up with Workflow Manager. Workflow Manager is an orchestrator of the Anuvaad pipeline. Workflow Manager is that application which understands what the user is trying to do, and based on that, makes use of the components of the system in order to achieve what user is trying to do. Do you understand?
Yeah, got it.
Right?
Yes,
So
yes,
so
got it.
now, right? So now in Anuvad, now let's say I'm a user, I'm in front of Anuvad. Now first I want to know what all can Anuvad do. I know that Anuvad can do translation, Anuvad can do document digitization, Anuvad can do parallel corpus creation, Anuvad can also do annotation, Anuvad can do what? the document digitization, as I said. So these are multiple features of this Anuvaad platform. Now, me as a user can do anything, right? Either I can do translation, or I just want to do digitization, or I might just want to do corpus creation. So these features from the Anuvaad have to be exposed to the user so that the user can actually perform these actions. For that, what we have done is we have these workflows defined in our system. So, in order to expose multiple features of Anuvaad, we have defined multiple workflows. Say, for example, if a user wants to do translation, then there is a workflow. So, user can use a particular workflow code and say to the workflow manager that please execute this workflow into the system. So, the user will just give you two things. User will say, this is my input, this is my input file, and this is the workflow that I want to run on this input file. Both of these will go to the workflow manager, and the workflow manager will perform everything else. Similarly, the user will say, this is my input document and this is my workflow code. That workflow code can belong to digitization, right? So the user can say, I want this document to be digitized. This is a book, this is a handwritten book that I have. I want to digitize it. So a workflow manager would have already, so the user will already have access to the workflow codes, right? Because all these workflows are already defined. So the user will check, okay, I want to do document digitization. So which is the correct workflow? So he'll get a code. So that code and the input will be given to workflow manager. The workflow manager will use this input file and perform that workflow on the input. It's a very, so this is the whole idea behind workflow manager. Got it?
Okay.
Right. So now, how will workflow manager know what to do? Say, for example, the user says, this is my input. This is an input file. It's an English file. And I want to translate it into Kannada. So now the user says, okay, the user says this is the input. The input is an English file. The input language is English. The target language is Kannada. XYZ is a workflow code. So this input is given to workflow manager. Workflow manager sees that, okay, this is the input, which the input contains three parameters here: the input file, the source language, and the target language. And the workflow code is XYZ. Now, workflow manager already has these configurations in it, right? We have already defined a YAML file where we have maintained all the workflows. So there we have already defined that the workflow code XYZ corresponds to a workflow where step one is this, step two is this, step three is this, and step four is this. So workflow manager reads from that memory because it already knows the workflow code. So it goes and searches, okay, tell me the steps of the workflow code XYZ. It gets all these steps and it also has the input. Then workflow manager goes module by module. Now workflow manager knows that the step one of the workflow code XYZ is block merger. So the workflow manager takes this input, goes to block merger. What does block merger do? Block merger will perform. What is happening? Looks like something went wrong. We're trying to get it. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, Vishal.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah, now you're audible.
Now you're audible. There's some break. Your voice was breaking a bit.
Hello. Vishal, you're on mute.
Hello, Shriri. Am I audible?
Yeah, now you're audible.
Huh?
Yeah,
Are you
yeah.
guys able to see my screen?
Now we are not able to see. You're just audible. Yeah,
Yeah,
we are able to see now.
Okay, let me reshare them. Are you able to see now?
Not yet.
not yet.
Yes, yes. Yes, we can see it now.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, Vishal.
Yeah, are you able to see my screen
No. You stopped it, I think.
now?
Yeah, now I can see.
Now you can.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, what I was saying is, so basically, workflow manager receives this input. Okay, and now it already also knows what are the steps to be followed, and workflow manager just performs those steps. So workflow manager is more like an orchestrator come proxy. Okay. So these are actually two design patterns in architecture level. So one is called as a workflow. Workflow itself is a design pattern. Another design pattern is proxy. The another design pattern is orchestrators. So orchestrators are a category of design patterns, you could say. So basically it's a combination of all these three things that we have implemented here. Okay.
So Vishal, when you
Is
say
it clear till now?
so when you say orchestration, like can we have any
Uh,
like is it something similar to airflow, like we have in Apache airflow?
yep.
Do that?
It is it is like an airflow only.
Okay.
So Airflow is one orchestrator, but the only difference is Workflow Manager is a custom built orchestrator. Airflow basic. So what you do in Airflow is you set up a Airflow instance and you plug in all your Splunk jobs or Python jobs to Airflow and it performs whatever you ask it to do. Workflow Manager also does the same, but Workflow Manager is custom built for Anuvaad, so that yeah, it can be used in other places also provided, but here when I say custom built for Anuvaad, I just mean that it uses Kafka and it uses a certain set of request response format, etc.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, so this is what it does. So now, okay, so now workflow manager is, so basically I said that workflow manager is a combination of two patterns or basically two actors. One is a proxy and another one is a workflow. So workflow manager, apart from managing the workflow, as in apart from running jobs through the pipeline using the components of the pipeline, it also is a point of contact for the UI or the client to know that what is happening inside the pipeline. Say, for example, I want to run a translation job. So there are multiple terminologies. Here you will find it in this document I've already mentioned. What do you mean by a job? What is meant by a task and all that. Okay. So to give you an overview, workflow manager executes a job, right? Translation is a job from one end to other end. The tasks involved within a job are called multiple tasks. Say, for example, block merger is one task, tokenization is another task, translation is another task. But all these three together as translation is one single job. Understood? So
Okay.
this is the difference between a job and a task in the workflow manager context. So whenever you execute a translation job, you will have multiple task IDs and you will have one single job ID. The task ID will correspond to that particular task and the job ID will correspond to the entire job. Now, if you want to know what happened in the job, you use the job ID, which will give you the complete trace of the job. But if you want to understand what happened in that particular step, then you use task ID. The task ID will give you what happened in that particular step.
Okay. Got it.
Got it? So two IDs are involved. Job ID is the unique ID for every job. Task ID is the unique ID for every task. A single job ID can have multiple task IDs. It's a one-to-many relationship.
Okay.
Okay. So now you have started. So basically now as an orchestrator, right? Now workflow manager is an orchestrator which is orchestrating the whole Anuvaad pipeline. Now that in order for that to happen, then every component inside the pipeline must follow certain set of rules. Okay. Say for example, now you are running a Kubernetes cluster and you have like 100 pods in your cluster. Now, if all these pods have to be a part of the Kubernetes cluster, then they have to conform to certain standards, right? There is a format in which the configurations have to be passed. There is a format in which you have to connect to the kube cluster. You have to connect to you have to be given some memory, CPU cycles, etc. Similarly, since Workflow Manager is an orchestrator of the Anuvaad pipeline, any component that comes into the Anuvaad pipeline must follow certain standards. Those standards are defined by workflow manager. So workflow manager says that if there is any component that comes into the Anuvaad pipeline, say tomorrow, now like for example, we had block merger, which was OCR before, but now we have multiple pipelines. We have a document digitization 1.0, and there's a document digitization 2.0. So multiple pipelines. So similarly, new components keep on getting added. Initially, we had only block merger, tokenization, translation, NMT. Now we have this file uploader, file converter, document converter, digitization, and aligner, all of that. So anytime a new component, a new microservice comes into the Anuvaad ecosystem, then it has to conform to certain standards. So there is a well-defined request format, then there is a well-defined response format, and all of them will be talking to workflow manager only via Kafka. So these are set of rules. So if a component comes to Anuvaad and it wants to be a part of the pipeline, then there has to be three things. It has to expose an input topic through which the workflow manager can talk to the component, an output topic through which the component can talk to workflow manager, and then there is a standard request response format. So these three things have to be under these three things are compulsory. So once these three things are available, the component can be onboarded into the Anuvaad pipeline and can be connected to workflow manager. Now, if you see, block merger follows the same, tokenizer follows the same, translator follows the same. All of them have an input topic, output topic, and a request response format. The request response format is general, okay? So there is a format which every component has to follow. Similarly, the output format also is common, which every component has to follow. Input output topic, the naming convention is standard, but the name can be different. Okay, so it is usually module underscore input underscore topic, module underscore output underscore topic, something like that. So there is a format. The format is standard, but the name can be it's left to the developer. So once any component which is newly built should follow this. Now, what I said before, right? The whole idea of converting it into microservice was to make sure that every component acts as a part of the pipeline and also as a standalone application. Now, for that part, if an application has to also act as a standalone application, then at that time it also has to expose APIs, right? Now, say block merger is there. Now, block merger can be used as a part of the Anuvaad pipeline during translation, digitization, etc. At the same time, it can also be used as a standalone block merger application from any client. A client can just pass a file and the block merger will get back with the digitized content. There is no workflow manager or Anuvaad at all here, correct?
Okay, got it.
So similarly, so every application in the system can behave as a standalone application also, and also as a part of the Anuvaad pipeline. For that, if it has to behave as a part of the Anuvaad pipeline, then three things are mandatory: input topic, output topic, request response format, and the Kafka connection with workflow manager. Now, if it has to work as a standalone application, then it has to provide APIs also. So these are the standards, or these are the rules for any new component that has to be developed. Got it?
Got it.
Now, what are those formats and everything are already there in this document, so you can just go through and you will understand. Here I've also linked the configurations. So these are the configurations. Say, for example, you go to BD, you'll see. So this is how a standard configuration looks like. This is the workflow code. Workflow manager supports two type of workflows: async workflow and sync workflow. Async workflow is where workflow manager will talk to the modules via Kafka. Sync workflow is where workflow manager will talk to the modules via APIs. Okay, so those are two types of workflows. Now FCBM is basically a conversion. This is a digitization flow where you upload a file, it converts it to the PDF, and then extracts the multiple blocks. So basically, you will get paragraphs out of the input document. And use case is nothing but a prefix that has to be added to the job ID. Then sequence, it's self-explanatory. So a sequence is nothing but the step of what do you call the step of tools that have to be executed. So sequence is a list of objects. Every object has order. It's sequence is an object which has one parameter called order and then another parameter called tool. Tool is nothing but list of tools, and every tool has these parameters. Every tool has a name, description, what is its input topic, what is its output topic. Interruptible is a key where if you say interruptible equal to true, then it means that the workflow can be interrupted at this step. Say, for example, you have triggered workflow manager, this workflow of FCBM. Then when this workflow is executing, at the file converter step, the workflow can be interrupted. Now, there are cases once the workflow is started, you cannot interrupt it at all. So at that time, it becomes false. Then there is another key called end state to say whether this step, whether it is the end state or not. If it is the end state, you say true, otherwise it is false. So most of the times, this key will be at the last step only. It won't be at the intermediate steps. So this is your first tool. Similarly, this is your second tool. One is for file converter, another one for the block merger. Similarly, whenever a new tool comes into picture, you have to add these things. So basically, let's say you want to define a workflow called FCBM TKTR, which is our translation. This is our translation workflow. So here, if you see, the first is file converter, block merger, tokenizer, translator. Tomorrow you want another step here, copy, paste, add the details of that step. That's also a new step will be included. Got it?
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So these are async workflows. Similarly, there are sync workflows. Sync workflow is where workflow manager talks via API, right? So this is the translate sentences. S_TR is a translation workflow where basically the user, you know that, right? On the UI, basically the user can change the input. The input sentence can be changed, and you say save, that sentence gets retranslated. That happens through this workflow. So the UI will call this workflow saying that this is the workflow code, the input is a sentence, please translate it. So the workflow manager will go to the translator module, call this API, whatever output is obtained will be returned back. Similarly, how async workflows have a standard input output format, even sync workflows will have a standard input output format. Got it?
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Okay. So these are the two types of workflows. This is how you configure the workflows inside the system. And the philosophy, anyway, you understand. Then apart from that, in terms of code, yeah, of course. And by the way, okay, I'll come to that later on. Cool. So here, this is the code. Okay, here you see the controller layer, right? There are multiple. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is a controller. Here you have async initiate, which initiates an async workflow. Then there is sync initiate, which initiates a sync workflow. Two APIs. Then there's an interrupt API, which actually interrupts the workflow. This is not being used at all, so you don't have to worry. Then there is a search bulk API where you pass the job IDs, a list of job IDs, and you'll get the user. Either you pass user IDs or you pass job IDs. The contract is available. I'll send you the collection. Okay. So this will return all the jobs. This is the UI uses this to populate the inbox of all the users.
Okay.
And then this is the inactive where you can actually mark a job as inactive, which will not show up in the inbox at all. Once you mark it as inactive, it will be into the cold storage of the system. It will not show up on the UI at all. Then there is config search. This is basically for searching the configurations because the UI has to know that which all workflows are there in the system, right? So you basically hit this API, you'll get a list of workflows defined in the system. Right now, it's not there, but initially that was the design. Whenever the user uploads a file, there should be a drop down given at the side where the user can select which workflow he wants to execute. But now we don't do that. We by default take the workflow code for translation, and because you already know that, right? We already know which is the translation workflow, so we just pick it by default.
Yes. Okay.
So these are the APIs, and so these are the APIs.
But I think in users we have an option, right, Vishal? There we can select that 1.2 or 1.0 for the digitization. In that case,
that is digitization.
Okay.
Yeah, that is digitization. For that also they use the same API. But for translation, all it is not there.
No, we have a drop down there, right? I just wanted to mention that.
Yes, it is there. And that's so technically that was the idea. So that is what we wanted to do everywhere, but then we didn't do it. Okay. So that is one thing. But yeah, you're right. So there it has. Then here, yeah. Then there is in Kafka wrapper, there are multiple consumers. This is the workflow manager consumer. Okay, basically there are, if you see, there are three consumers here: core consumer, error consumer, workflow manager consumer. So workflow manager runs three consumers inside. The workflow manager core consumer is between workflow manager only. Basically, the workflow manager receives a request from the UI and it validates that request. If the request is correct, it will initiate a workflow. For that, it pushes onto a topic. The core consumer will pick it from there. So the core consumer is for intra communication, inside workflow manager communication. The WFM consumer, this one is for inter communication, where the workflow manager talks to multiple modules. So workflow manager talks to block merger, translator, tokenizer, all of that happens through this consumer.
Oh,
Error
okay.
consumer is whenever there is an error. Suppose the Anuvaad, so there is a translation happening and there is an error in the block merger service. How will workflow manager know? It will know through the error consumer.
Okay, okay. Got it.
Got it? So these are the three consumers. And there is only one producer, so we don't need anything else. Then there is repository. Repository is where all this Mongo, Redis are there. Okay. Basically, workflow manager stores all the job information inside the MongoDB. So this is the repository for that Mongo instance. Then there is services. Here is where you have functions which actually start the job. This registers a sync job. This registers a async job, because there are two types of workflows. And this is a function for interrupt job, right? You saw the API, no? That is the one. Then this is a function for inactive, where the job gets marked inactive and will not show up on the UI. Process sync is a function which actually processes the sync workflows. The one I showed you.
Okay.
Validate tool response is again a function that actually validates the tool response. Say for example, I made a call to block merger. Block merger responded back with the output, but that output has to be validated, right? Whether it follows the standard format or not. Is the response successful or not? So these things have to be validated, which is done by this function.
Oh, okay.
Then there is workflow details for sync. This function basically converts all the input output JSONs, the input that is received from the client, the input that is received from the object, sorry, not object, but the components. All of these input output JSONs have to be converted in a format that can be stored in the MongoDB. So this function does it for sync workflows. Like how we have sync workflows, we have functions for async workflow as well. Okay.
Okay.
So now this is the function for async workflow. Async workflow mainly runs on two functions. One is the initiate workflow and a manage workflow. Initiate workflow is where it initiates the workflow for the first time. Manage workflow function is a function which is being called by all the components, right? Say initiate workflow happens when the when the job is registered. So the job gets registered, the job is pushed onto the workflow manager core consumer topic. Workflow manager receives it, then it actually finds out, okay, this is the workflow code. So the first step of this workflow is block merger. So at that point, initiate workflow is called. So the workflow manager initiates a workflow by pushing the data to the block merger topic. Once that is done, all the consecutive steps are handled by the manage workflow.
Oh, okay.
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 And then this is a notifier function where you push it to the notifier to tell the user that the job is over. So get next step details. All of these are utility functions which are used by the functions on top. Got it?
Okay.
So you go through these functions, you'll understand they are very simple. Update errors is a function used by the error consumer. So whenever an error happens in one of the components will use log underscore exception, log underscore error, or they use these functions, right? Post error workflow. All of these are there, which are exposed in the Anuvaad auditor library. So whenever someone uses a post error workflow function, by default, that function will not only log the error, but will also push the error to the error topic where the workflow manager will be listening to.
Oh, okay.
So that will be received and this function will process that error. Okay.
Oh,
And
okay.
then these are the tools. So these are the classes for tools. Okay. There could have been a common class, but we didn't do it. So because we wanted to keep these tools all decoupled, because tomorrow we want to add some extra logic for aligner or say block segmenter, which is not required for other modules, and we should be able to do it. For that reason, we have separate files here where there is where there are functions as to how to do. Say for example, if it is a sync workflow, it uses this function. If it is an async workflow, it uses this function. Got it?
Okay, got it.
So these are for all the tools, and then these are the utilities. Say for example, I think conversion, configurations, all the output top. So these are all utilities. If you go through it, you'll understand. Okay.
Okay.
Say for
Vishal,
example, one utility could be, yeah,
so I have one doubt. For the sync and async versions,
uh,
so currently is async could be called from by outside only. So sync will be calling from internal APIs only, right?
internal APIs as in no. So basically, the client will first call the workflow manager. Okay.
Okay.
So the client will first call the workflow manager as a sync API. Then the workflow manager will internally call all the services.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay. Say for example, let's say that there is a paragraph. Okay. You
Okay.
as a user made some change to the paragraph. Now,
Okay.
whenever a change has happened to the paragraph, what should happen? It has to be retranslated, correct?
Yes.
Because the paragraph has changed, so the translation has to change. Now, for that to happen, you can't do it in one step. It's a two-step process. Since the input is a paragraph, it has to first get tokenized again, and then every sentence has to be translated again.
Yes.
So now what is happening? Now what has happened here? It's a two-step. So the UI says that this is a paragraph that we have changed, and we want this to be retranslated. Now, since it's a paragraph level change, we don't want to do a async flow where, okay, you put it to the Kafka, the consumer will receive, again it will process. So the UI will again keep polling and then searching. All of that will make no sense when the translation is happening at the sentence and the paragraph level. It will only make sense when the translation happens at the document level because it takes more time. The paragraph and sentence will happen within seconds. So there is no point of making them async. So the Kafka will not get involved there. So what is the other way? It is through APIs. So the UI will call the workflow manager's API with the paragraph, with the paragraph and the workflow code. The workflow manager sees that okay, the workflow code is WF underscore A underscore TKTR, and it knows that there are two steps involved in this workflow. One is tokenization and one is translator. So what workflow manager does? Workflow manager first makes call to the tokenizer API, gets the response. Using that response, it calls the translator API, gets the response, and then gives it back to the UI. So the calls to tokenizer and translator are internal calls only. But the call to workflow manager from the client is a outside call.
Okay. Got it. Got it.
Got it?
Yeah. Got
Abhishek,
it.
are you clear?
Yes, Vishal.
Abhishek?
Clear.
Okay, okay, cool. So yeah, so these are the utility functions. So basically, one of the utility can be this. Okay. Now now workflow manager is processing a translation job, and it is at the tokenizer step. Now the workflow manager must know which is its next step, right? So for that, it uses one function. That function actually reads the configuration and tells the workflow manager that the next step is translator. So the workflow manager picks the translator. So basically converts the output of tokenizer into the input of translator and then pushes it to the translator topic.
Okay.
Got it?
Okay. Got it.
So yeah, so that is one example of utility. Similarly, there are multiple utilities. So once you go through the function, you'll get to know. Got it?
Yeah. Got it. Sure.
So so you guys understood what workflow manager does, what are the type of workflows, and from where it reads configurations?
Yeah. Yeah, Vishal.
Yes, Vishal.
Got a high level overview.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, that's what. Once you go through the documentation, configuration, and the code, you'll have a proper understanding, like in-depth understanding. So one other thing that you have to realize is one through the pipeline, right? So we have a data flow design. Okay, the data flow through the pipeline is in such a way that from the user till the translator, the data flows as a file. But after translator, it flows as a JSON.
Yes.
So that is important because the user uploads a file. The
Uh,
file gets uploaded using the file uploader service. The PDF is then moved to the block merger, right? So the block merger downloads the PDF, converts it into a OCR. So basically, it breaks all the paragraphs and everything, and again creates a JSON file. It will create a JSON, but it will again be a file only. So it uploads this file. Now this file is again read by tokenizer. Tokenizer tokenizes and again uploads the file. Translator now downloads this file again, and then from here on, from the translator and further, it moves as a JSON. But before that, it moves as a JSON file. First as a PDF file, then as a JSON file.
oh, okay.
Okay. So yeah, so this is the data flow design of it, and the data flow, and yeah, because these are all conscious calls that we took while designing. So when I was designing this whole Anuvaad system, all of this, basically whatever I'm telling you now, right? The proxy pattern, the workflow pattern, breaking it into microservices, making a standard input output format as a work, making sure that every application works as a standalone as well as a part of the pipeline, and the unidirectional data flow. So all of this, all of this is part of our design that we did. Okay.
Okay.
So you should be knowing it. You should know that the data always flows in one direction in Workflow Manager. The data doesn't come ulta. So the data always flows from downstream. So it goes from file uploader to block merger to translator to tokenizer. Here, the data goes on getting divided, right? The data, which was a PDF file, at the end of the day is stored as a sentence. It is broken. The data doesn't flow in the opposite direction. It doesn't flow from content handler to file uploader. It always flows from file uploader to content handler. So all of these are design principles. So whenever you're making any change, you should be making sure that you don't go against these principles. Okay.
Okay. Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are the things. Yeah. So yeah. So this is I think a decent overview of this application. So you just go through the code, documentation, configuration, everything. If you have any doubts, let me know. I also have a set of enhancements that has to be done in Workflow Manager. Since I did not have time, I couldn't do it. Okay. But I have a list of refactoring and the enhancements to be done. Once both of you have assimilated this logic properly, then I'll tell you the enhancement that you have to do here. Okay. Then one of you can just pick it up and start working on it.
Yeah, sure, Usha.
Yeah. Maybe you or whoever is free should start working on it. One example I'll give you. Okay. One example of an enhancement is this, the configuration format. See
Okay.
here, if you see, uh, okay, let's take these two. Okay. This is one workflow.
Okay.
It is FCBM. This is FCBM TK, correct?
Yes.
Now, don't you see that there is a problem here? Problem as in, aren't we rewriting this whole thing here? And again, we are copy pasting the whole thing here,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Instead of that, we can just move this to a separate file. We can call it as components.yaml, where we define all of this, where we define this information for every module as a list. And in the configuration YAML, we'll just write the name. We'll say order, step one is file converter, step two block merger. That's all. Now, what is the input output of file converter? You'll get it from the components.yaml.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Got it.
Got it? So if you do that, then the file will become very small. So you can actually reduce the file.
Okay.
Got it, right?
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So enhancements like this are already there. I've actually noted these things down. And even at the code level, there are refactoring that we can do. Okay. So basically, these tools, we can actually create this more like a interface and an implementation level type of, what do you call, more like an abstract factory type of pattern, where we have one common tools.py, which has all the common functions, and all of these other tools will just implement the same function with a slightly different implementation. But the common interface will be tools.py.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah, so that we can do here. Then there is in this repository, here you can see this is a MongoDB, right? So this can be created as a global instance. Here it is no global instance at all. So every time this MongoDB connection is reinstantiated. Instead of that, we can have a single global MongoDB instance,
Yes.
right?
Okay. Okay.
So that is one thing. Then second thing is here. I think there are threads here. Is it? Yeah. See here you have threads, right? Instead of threads, we can make these as processes because that will actually give you more performance. So all of these are already there. These are already there in my mind, but since I did not have time, I can't do it. So yeah, I just want you guys to, kind of digest this whole code, configuration, documentation, everything. Once that is done, these are very small changes. We can sit together and start working on these.
Okay. Sure. Sure. We'll do
Yeah,
that.
Sure,
cool.
Vishal.
So yeah. So first, let's finish the workflow manager. Then we'll go to translator. Okay.
Okay, Vishal. Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
If you guys
So
have any doubts, just let me know. Okay. I
yeah.
think this should be fine.
Yeah. I'll just walk through the code and as well as the documentation once, and I'll let you know if I'm facing any issue there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Sure.
Sure, Vishal. Thanks for the session.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Bye.
And Vishal,